how did you get into the military? It says here you were in for 3 years in the Army. Did you get drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted, but there's a little story about that.
Okay.
And before I tell you the story, though, I will tell you that it is a pleasure to, and I appreciate the opportunity to relate my war experiences. And
Right.
There were a lot of heroes, of course, in World War II, and I don't consider anything that I did or was near or anything like that was particularly heroic, but I'm glad to relate the experience, some of the experiences that I had. And in World War II, the real glamour boys of I felt were the guys in the Air Force, and they flew the airplanes, and they had a cocky attitude, and everybody thought they were really great because they flew a P-51 or this or that, and B-26, 24, and they wore their hats in a cocky sort of way, and I thought this was great, and flying an airplane would just be fantastic. So I went downtown to enlist in the Air Force, and one of the first questions they asked was, did you ever have a serious head injury? And I said no. The only thing I ever had was a concussion when I was a little kid. And that fast I was out on the sidewalk because they didn't want anybody who had had a concussion. I didn't realize that. But fast forwarding, I was in a college in the Army, at Antioch College, and they disbanded the unit there, and I had a chance to go over to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I asked them if I could join the Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army at that time.
Right.
And they said, sure, if you can pass the test. So I took the test, and they said, did you ever have a head injury? And I said, no, I never had a head injury. So I went in, and so I did go to what they called a college training detachment and that sort of thing, but never got to fly because then they stopped the Air Force program because they had enough pilots.
What year was that?
What year? That must have been about 1944. I would
44.
guess. 43 or 44.
Okay.
So in the meantime, before this second trial at the Air Force materialized, I wanted to, I had to wait and be drafted. So I was drafted, went to Fort Meade, and then worked my way to the point where from Antioch I asked to go to the Air Force and got in. But from there I went to the 20th Armored Division in Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Fort Campbell.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you went to 20th through the whole conflict?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I went from being a wannabe hot rod pilot to a tank driver.
Well, that's not all that bad. Yeah, yeah. So, in other words, you entered the service in the Army, and you stayed for what, 3 or 4 years, or?
I was in the Army for 3 years.
3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, but I transferred around to different places early on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
okay. Your MOS, so to speak, was a tank driver?
I started out as a tank driver, wound up in the same division as just an armored infantryman, and our method of maneuvering was in half tracks.
I see.
Which a lot of people these days don't know what they were.
They don't know what a half track is, do they?
I'm surprised.
Right. Yeah. The half track was a good machine.
Mm-hmm.
It would float.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It would float. Yeah. Okay. I guess I'm going to jump over here to another sheet of paper and just ask you a question. What influenced you to get in the military? Did you feel that you owed it to the country? You felt that you were going to miss something if you didn't get in the military? Yeah. How did you feel?
Well, I was just patriotic and still am.
Patriotic, okay.
And, I think there's nothing like being an American.
Right.
And it's worth fighting for. And at the time, people and young men still feel the same. A lot of young men still feel the same, that it's worth fighting for and worth giving up your life for if necessary.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you never did regret going into the military?
No, not at all.
Even during boot camp?
Nope.
It was tough, wasn't it?
Well, it was, but I'm a very positive thinker.
Okay.
And everything that happened, I got pleasure from, even if it was just being transferred from one place to another and seeing being stationed outside a different place from where I had been before. Uh-huh. And all of that was interesting to me. And every day is a new experience in the Army.
Yes.
And then, of course, going to Europe. And as a kid, I had never, for all practical purposes, I'd never left home. And it was exciting to see all the different parts of the world that I wasn't familiar with.
You're a native Carroll Countian?
No, I lived in Baltimore
Baltimore
at that time.
At that time,
mm-hmm.
Okay. But yeah, I understand what you're saying, because World War II kind of opened up a lot of our young men to see the world.
Right.
You know, and it's you're a person that sees a glass half full instead of half empty.
That's right.
So that's the way to be.
I see it three quarters full.
3/4 full. Okay.
Matter of fact.
Right. Right. Okay. When you went through boot camp at.
That would have been at Fort Gordon, I think.
Fort Gordon. Okay.
And
okay.
Then they put us on a train one day and didn't tell us where we were going, and we got off the train at Xenia, Ohio, and went to Antioch College.
Antioch, I see that. Uh-huh.
And what they called the ASTP, the Army Specialized Training Program. And we were supposed to be in college for 6 months or a year, and then come out as second lieutenants, in our case as engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And but as I said, that program was discontinued, and that's how I worked my way to the Air Force, which led to going to other places as well.
Okay. Sure, I see you were in Miami, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And looked like you were in Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's quite a place, Fort Campbell. Yes.
We went through basic training there, and maneuvers and in our tanks and that sort of thing.
What was your favorite thing about serving in the military? The camaraderie and the feeling that you were making a difference?
The camaraderie was great, but the main thing was people had a feeling there, an intense feel in those days,
right,
about being in the war. Everybody was involved with it, mentally and physically, and as one of those kinds of people, I felt that I was glad to be in the service and doing my part for my country.
You probably remember the victory gardens and rationing of gas and tires and all that, right?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What was the favorite thing that you did in the Army besides your unit? Did you have off time that you enjoyed that you could talk about?
I often, usually on weekends, I could get a weekend pass. And, excuse me, would go into town and had girlfriends and was sightseeing and that sort of thing.
So,
and
so you saw the world. basically.
Enjoyed it very much.
Right. Now, when you were in Germany, what time of the year was that? Winter, summer, or?
I'm sorry?
What time of the year were you in Germany? Was it winter time or?
Oh, it was, actually we got there in February.
February.
And we landed in Le Havre. And it was kind of shocking when we got there into the harbor and saw that Le Havre wasn't much higher than that. It had all been, it was just rubble. And we saw, I remember looking over from the boat before we disembarked and from the ship and seeing one man out amidst all this rubble, and he had a cart being pulled by a horse, a four-wheel cart, and he was loading up bricks and moving bricks and doing it. And that was about all the activity that you could see at that time. This was late in the war.
Right.
And the war had moved on from France into Germany by that time.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So we picked up the war. Well, we didn't get to the actual combat part until we got to Munich.
To Munich?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. So you entered combat at Munich, and how long were you in combat?
Actually, it was not too long. I guess we'd say maybe a month.
Mm-hmm.
And because the war was winding down.
Winding down.
And I think, looking back, I think our division was training to go to Japan because we were scheduled to go to Japan after the war in Europe was over. And when we got into New York Harbor, we were one of the first ones to leave Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got to leave Europe, and when we got to New York, boys were selling newspapers, and they were hollering extra, extra, and they had dropped a new kind of bomb. And this was in August of 45.
45,
and,
okay.
We said, oh, dropped another bomb. They've been dropping new bombs every 2 weeks. And but this one happened to be the atom bomb.
Right.
And the war ended just shortly after we landed.
So actually, your division was on kind of alert for Japan had they not dropped the bomb.
That's right. Mm-hmm. We were supposed to land on the Honshu plain, and fortunately, I went to California we were supposed to reorganize and get new equipment and go for this invasion.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to California, but we never. I was discharged there, and or released for discharge, and was discharged at Fort Meade.
So you came back from California to Meade and then got discharged.
Right.
Uh-huh. How did that division feel going into combat for 30 days, not knowing how long it was going to be, and then suddenly your combat was over, but then you had in the back of your mind, we may go to Japan. How'd that make you feel?
I'm not sure we were aware at that time that we might be scheduled for Japan. But it was a great feeling to know that the war was there. It was unbelievable.
Right.
It was hard to understand because we had all been in the service for 3 years or so. And that was the life that we had lived. We were totally immersed in it. And it was hard to imagine that the war was over and what it would be like now.
It was probably a feeling that's hard to explain.
It is. Mm-hmm.
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 Yeah. So
But good.
yeah, and you still have feelings today of what occurred.
I'm sorry.
Your feelings today are still, wow, it's over, and I'm alive.
At that time,
did you lose friends there that you were close to in the war?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it was going to be a different life, of course, now.
Uh-huh.
I might mention that on the way we shipped back to the United States from Le Havre, and we were on a train going to what they called Camp Lucky Strike, which was a huge camp that classified the troops to get shipped back. And on the way we were on a train and to get to Le Havre, and during the trip we had the train hit another train head on, and we had a very bad accident, and a number of people were injured. And and we were in the middle of Germany. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and interestingly enough, the locomotive would be on one end of the train at one time, and at the other end of the train another time. And I was the third car. We were in those railroad cattle cars, they called them.
Right.
And the accident happened when I was on the far from the locomotive, but the first two cattle cars, if you want to call them that,
right.
Went like that, and shattered. They were just wood, and it was, kind of a disaster. But and there are pictures in this. There's a picture in the book about
now,
showing the accident.
When the war was over, how many days did you spend in Germany after the war was declared over?
Well, that was in May, the war ended, and we shipped out in August.
In August.
And I missed a chance to go to visit. We had tours that they let us take, and there was a truck that was supposed to call us, to take us to Paris, and I had signed up for that. But the CQ didn't call me that morning, and I missed the trip, so I didn't get to go to Paris. But I went to Berchtesgaden and went through that and saw the palace of.
So after the war, you felt rather comfortable in the environment in Germany?
Mm-hmm.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
I wondered about that.
Well, immediately after the war, we were sent to. We were supposed to go to Yugoslavia because I believe it was Marshal Tito who was a communist leader of Yugoslavia at that time.
Right.
And they were afraid that there was going to be an uprising there. So they sent us to, we were on our way to Yugoslavia, but as happens so many times, you start to do something in the Army and the plans are changed totally and you do something different. So they called off our going there, but we went to a place called Ruhpolding in the Alps in Germany, and I remember it was August, and we had snowball battles in the crevasses of the mountains, and I remember we had no shirts on. It was really nice and warm, and having a snowball battle.
So after the war, even though you were in a foreign country, you didn't feel threatened?
No, not at all.
Not at all?
Well, when we were on the road on the way to Yugoslavia, we went through these long ravines, and the German troops were up on the hills, fully armed. They hadn't been disarmed yet.
Okay.
And we felt a little bit thoughtful about that, and that they could have, caused some problems, but they didn't. There was no problem.
Very
but
good.
we gave them some thought.
I bet. You can refer back to that book, and it gives you some good memories and some bad memories. Overall, you think that the war effort that you were in was well worthwhile?
Yes, indeed. And I won't bother with this. But, yes, World War II totally turned the world around.
It did, right.
And one of the main things, and I've always said, one of the main things that influenced that was the GI Bill of Rights,
yes,
which enabled so many hundreds of thousands of soldiers upon discharge to have the chance to go to college.
Yes.
And I think this is what was mainly responsible for the world that we have today. And because prior to that time, and I look at old pictures sometimes, and see that the world was totally different back before World War II, and it became faster. Things moved faster. Things were developed by the military, and in medicine,
Right.
and in science, that were greatly speeded up by the necessities of the war.
Right.
And it totally changed the world. Not only the United States, the whole world, I think.
The whole world.
As it had, from what it had been.
Right. And your medical care and your food and all that was good for you?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think military, my wife still kind of teases me a little bit because of sometimes I do things in sort of a little military way. And
I understand that. I understand.
Orderly is the word, I guess.
Right, right. Yeah, I've got a couple things over here that I brought in, that World War II mess kit. I guess you did you use that quite a bit?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of neat, isn't it?
It is. One of the pictures that I gave to the other fellow here was of a mess line, and the guys are standing there holding their mess kits at their sides.
You know how to do that. The old immersion heater, remember that? You had 3 immersion heaters, remember?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you put this like this. Put the spoon, the fork,
Yeah.
and the knife like this.
Dipped it in and spin it around.
And you dipped it into hot soapy
Yeah.
water, didn't you?
Right.
1, 2, 3.
And the water kept getting less soapy
Yes.
as you went along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
Might not have been totally sanitary, but
Right.
it did the job.
Right. And I've often the word mess kit.
Mm-hmm.
You put most of the mess in here,
That's right.
and then the dessert or something in the other,
That's
in
right.
the lid, so to speak.
And the cook would practically throw the stuff in your mess kit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's some good times. And you look back. Sometimes the worst times you look back are the best.
That's right.
Yeah. So.
They stay with you, and you never forget them.
Right.
Never forget.
Yeah. Well, in your own story, you came back to Carroll County after the war and settled down in Carroll County.
Well, actually, I had lived was born and raised in Baltimore.
Right.
And I lived in Baltimore until about 8 years ago.
Oh, is that right?
And Lynn and I were married, and we moved here to Carroll County.
Uh-huh.
And think we died and went to heaven. It's
Yes.
the greatest place in the world.
It's great. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to just, as you end your story?
Well, one thing that comes to mind when you brought up the mess kit and so forth, when we went overseas, we went on the Thomas Barry ship,
Uh-huh.
and of course it was loaded with soldiers, and in the mess hall, they had counters that went from side to side on the ship, and you'd get your food in a serving line, and go to one of these counters. Just stood up. There were no chairs, and it was very stormy, and the ship would roll from side to side,
Mm-hmm.
and as it did, the plates or the mess kits would go sliding down this way when the ship went that way, and then when it went the other way, they'd slide down the other way. And lots of times they'd go over the edge, and you had a mess on the floor, and it became slippery.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
And it was a little bit of an experience.
But
And when I first went on the ship, I ran into a friend from school, and who was in the Merchant Marine.
Okay.
And he was an officer, and he said, "Why don't you come up for lunch on the in the officers' mess?" So I said, "Fine, that would be great." So I went up, met him, and they had tables with tablecloths set up, but much different from the mess hall where you're going like that.
Right.
And we sat down to have our dinner, and somebody came up to take our order, and it was my platoon sergeant. And the platoon sergeant had, when we got on the ship, everybody tried to get a job in the cafeteria, something to do, and he got a job as a waiter in the officers' mess.
Huh.
And I sat there, and he saw me, and he said, "Spencer, what are you doing here?" And pretty quickly, I was out of the mess hall.
So he thought you shouldn't be there, huh?
Right.
Oh well. That's it. You know, probably the meals on the ships were pretty good, weren't they?
Yeah, they were better than for the officers' mess for the Merchant Marine than for the sailors. But everybody always complained about the food in the service, but I always thought it was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
When we first got on the ship, somebody came up from one of the lower holds, and he said, "You know what? There are some cartons of canned stuff down in this hold, and if we could get one of those cartons, we could, get some of this stuff and keep it with us, get some of this canned goods, and take it with us, and when we land." So we went down the hold, one or two of us, and came up with this big case of 8-gallon cans, 8 one-gallon cans of, I forget what it was, something that plums.
Plums.
And we got them up to our deck, and somebody said, "We don't want plums. Where do you bringing plums?" So back down, and it was a ladder,
Mm-hmm.
and back down and we traded the plums and we had to swipe them, because these were, and so back up the ladder, and we got pineapple that time. So every guy in our squad got a gallon can of pineapple, and we carried it in our knapsack through all the places that we went. And at the end of the war, we were in Ruhpolding, and we had moved a family out of a house there, and they lived in a barn, a man and a lady, and a little boy, about two or three, and we got out of there. They hadn't had, they had shortages, heavy shortages, and
this is in Germany, right?
Right.
Right.
And we got out our pineapple. They brought some potatoes, and we had there was a new ration. I forget like a D ration, I think. We had a roast of beef and canned, and we got that out. They brought potatoes and onions, and we all had dinner together.
You had a feast.
And that's right, with these people whose house we had taken over. It's an experience.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. So would you do it again?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay.
I'd do it right now if necessary.
There you go. Okay, well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
It's been nice to talk to you.
Okay.